So, In a Violent Nature is the story of Johnny, a vengeful spirit that is resurrected at the beginning of the film when a golden locket is taken from his grave site, his burial site out in the woods in Ontario, Canada, by a couple of curious teenagers. He crawls out of the ground and he begins walking through the woods very quietly, just stalking slowly. Eventually, Johnny happens upon a highway. Eventually, he happens upon our teenagers, and terrible things befall them. It's a story you've seen a few times in cinema. It's very similar to Friday the 13th. Jason Voorhees, right? Big supernatural, spiritual stalker, tracks down a bunch of teenagers and gives them what for, except uniquely, In a Violent Nature is told from the perspective of our killer. This is the gimmick of In a Violent Nature, along with, I should say, its very unique pacing. And writer-director Chris Nash brings something specific to his vision of In a Violent Nature. Not only is it agonizingly slow with a functionally non-existent soundtrack, it is brutally gory. Good God, some of the most visceral kills I've ever seen in a theater. I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe my ears. I heard people threw up a can, and I'm excited to talk about why. The film is In a Violent Nature. 94 minutes, tidy, and quite a bit of fun, I think. Andy, what did you think of In a Violent Nature?
I definitely appreciated what it was trying to do, from not only showing the perspective of the slasher, the killer, but also taking this real, almost avant-garde, slow pace. I mean, there's a lot of walking behind this guy in the woods, and it kind of feels like a video game, almost like you're controlling them, because it's literally just him walking in nature from behind, third person. But there's something to it. We get, again, all these homages to classic slasher films of the 70s and 80s, lots of horror archetypes. There's a lot of humor. It's surprisingly funny in a lot of places. Really fantastic, gory kills. And it kind of goes in places maybe you don't expect, given most of how the film. I really appreciated what it was trying to do. Some people, they're going to say it's too slow. Some people even say it's not slow enough. But I appreciated the gesture.
Yeah, I've been really surprised by people that said this film isn't slow enough. I assume that was just like a joke take, but Twitter's a unique place and there's a lot of unique takes on it. And I think there's some people who mean that sincerely. This movie is almost too slow. I think it will be its biggest hurdle to overcome any kind of popularity. It's practically experimental. And when I went and saw it, I caught an early screening just a couple days before the Friday it dropped last Friday. And that was a pretty full theater, like full of people who were arriving to see this thing ahead of time, who'd been looking forward to it, who specifically booked this one-time screening to go see it. And even they were like getting phones out and were bored. Like, I think horror is a unique genre for people to kind of get into, and I think people like what they like and they like what they don't, and they don't like what they don't like. And I think a lot of like Blumhouse fans are going to feel like this is too different. But again, it's functionally experimental. Like, it really is. I'd put it right up there with something like Skinamarink. Like, you are in a different space with a very different pace that is very different from anything else that's currently out right now. And I think that's a good thing. I'm glad I saw it in theaters. Like, I'm excited to talk about it here. But I feel like that's kind of where you have to start talking about it, because you're just following this guy the whole movie and you never really get a break from that. And it's a lot of really long takes of just kind of trudging through the woods. It's also thoughtful. It's also a unique presentation on the nature of violence and the violence of nature, I think. And that's kind of expanded upon towards the end of the film with a really unique monologue from a character. But before we get too far into it, we should just be a bit more specific with the plot. So when I said at the beginning that like Johnny wakes up in the woods, crawls out of the ground, starts marching through till he finds a highway, I don't mean to say that in any kind of like, I don't know, veneer, like I'm not zipping over details. That's like the first 15 minutes of the movie. Like that's really kind of how it goes. And I think what you get in that time is a lot of like thoughtful introspection. A lot of time you can sit there and kind of really chew up what's going on, I think anybody coming to In a Violent Nature knows what the gimmick is. Like, I think it's kind of the best way this movie works. I don't think you go to this movie not knowing how it works. And like just that opening, like first third is just real slow and real trotting and real thoughtful. It's our second act when we meet our teenagers. It's our second act when our man Johnny starts finding our teenagers. That is when we have a turn into absolute insane gore fest, which is nuts. And by the way, I should say a cast full of people I don't know and actors and actresses I've never seen, and filmed almost entirely outdoors in Ontario. They shot all of this, I think, up there. And I've got some thoughts about the filmmaking, but before we get to it, Andy, the pace, what do you think so far?
Again, like you said, you got to know what you're getting into. It's like when we saw the movie Memoria with Tilda Swinton, which is like 10 times slower than this movie.
Yeah.
But that's the gimmick, and you know when you're going into that, that's what to expect. So a similar thing here. I mean, it works for me because it takes so long, and some people have pointed out it's the absurdity of the slasher, because there's times when it seems like it takes him a pretty long time to like walk up to someone, and I was just like, they would surely have heard his footsteps like 10 seconds before now. But I think it's kind of poking fun at itself a little bit by playing it really serious, because we it's very stereotypical, almost Cabin in the Woods-esque, where we have our group of teenagers who are all jerks, and they all kind of deserve it. We're not unhappy to see them go. They're out at in a cabin in the woods by a lake, like check all your horror movies off. But I mean, I appreciated it, but I'm a fan of avant-garde cinema, so probably an outlier.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really speaks to like what we're watching on screen is talking about how the film was made. So I didn't know. I did a little research before we hopped on here and found out that they basically shot this movie twice, which is weird. So director Chris Nash explained that the first time they kind of shot it in two parts. And the first kind of half of production, they had a ballooning budget and they couldn't figure out how to get all this equipment out to the woods efficiently to get these like long takes of our man just like walking. Johnny, played by Rye Barrett, I should say, who's a big hulk of a man. I've never seen him in anything, but I think it's worth mentioning since he is primarily who we're watching. And apparently they'd shot like this whole film and it just didn't work. Like in editing, it didn't really work and it didn't really come together. And while they were filming it, they had another creator filming kind of a documentary, the behind the scenes making of it, by a documentarian named Pierce Dirks. And so they decided functionally to go out and reshoot the whole movie. So they shot the whole thing again, and they couldn't get their original cinematographer back. He was like, "No, I'm not doing this again.
I'm not going back out to the woods."
So they had the documentarian Pierce Dirks shoot the movie again. And what we're seeing is the second film. We're seeing In a Violent Nature, like kind of round two. And Nash explained very clearly that this was actually a really great experience because it gave him a second pass at it, right? Like it gave him another opportunity to see how it would work. It helped them cut down like how they were getting cameras out to the woods and these kind of like go kits they were using to get people out faster, to shoot more efficiently. And they kind of just like threw it together by the end because they were way over budget, right? Like it's a film that has been plagued with problems. And to watch it, it doesn't seem that way because it's so simple. The film lacks a soundtrack. I don't think there is one at all. It's just nature sounds, right? So it's just walking and nature sounds, right, and a lot of sound effects of crunching and bone and sinew, and like what you get, I think, for that trade-off of a lot of nothing happening is in key moments very, very good suspense. That's something I think this movie does very well. Very good suspense in a violent nature. When Johnny's standing behind a tree and the camera cuts to way over there, these people he's looking at are just having a conversation in the dark, and one of them breaks off to go smoke a cigarette on their own. You know exactly what's going to happen to that person. They're not going to make it out. Or when Johnny like stalks over to a lake and you see a couple of teenagers just swimming, having a good time, like things aren't going to work out for him. It's kind of delightful in that way, right? Like it manages to capture the best parts of an old slasher movie where you're just waiting for Jason Voorhees to take out these teenagers. You're waiting for Michael Myers to get the jump on Jamie Lee Curtis. Like you get to backseat all of that and like enjoy the thrill of the hunt from the weird like other side. I think it's probably what Violent Nature does best.
Yeah, the kills and the stalking is really interesting because again, you see all those camera angles of like the killer out in the woods at night watching the teenagers from a distance outside the cabin. It's interesting to see that kind of opposite, and I guess you feel a little bit like like the slasher does, in that you have to do a lot of waiting, and you just got to be patient and wait for your opportunity. Which is, again, like the film is kind of funny in that way. It's poking fun at the genre, because he literally just has to sit there for 10 minutes until, like, okay, everyone's gone, and this guy is gonna go use the bathroom all by himself in the woods. Well, he's definitely gonna not make it for that. So it's poking fun at the genre while also kind of embracing those tropes and archetypes.
I like the way the film like grows the lore of Johnny, like explains a bit more about him, because at first you don't get a whole lot. Like, it's very simple. You see these teenagers take this locket. You even really hear them. You don't even see them physically do it. You just kind of hear them over the soundtrack. Over the sounds of nature, and then you see Johnny kind of climb out, and you know from the trailer that you kind of know where things are going, and the film gets rolling from there. But like, I was wondering watching it, like, how is this going to keep me glued in for 90 minutes? Because it can't just be a guy walking in the woods. And you actually get a lot of bleed over dialogue from other characters, like teenagers or a park ranger. Like having conversations that Johnny will functionally overhear as he is stalking them or walking towards them or waiting in the woods for them. There's a great campfire scene right at the end of Act 1 where like our teenagers are just talking casually around a campfire. Like, you ever hear the story of the, what do you call them, the White Pine Slaughter or something like that? No, what's that? They're like smoking a joint. Like, you just, like, you know, like all the trappings of a traditional horror movie are in there, but you get the delight of seeing it from the other side of the fence. That's that deconstruction. And like Andy said, that's part of where you get a lot of really great humor. It's also a fantastic, like, really, what am I trying to say here? It plows the earth. It's a fantastic seedbed. That's it, for like gruesome violence, because the movie does not shy away from these things. Like, at first it seems like, oh, okay, this isn't so bad, but like, no, it really takes you over the top and almost makes you feel a little guilty for having enjoyed like the journey as much as you did.
Yeah, one of the hallmarks of slashers of the 80s was kind of how gory they could be, try to gross out the audience. And this feels like it goes right in that same vein, where we know that our cast of teenage characters are all going to be hopelessly murdered. But when it gets there, it's worse than you imagine. And he seems to have kind of a vendetta with one of the people, I'm not going to say who experiences a protracted violent kill. But it's part of like the absurdity of it, for sure. But the kills are very surprising. I mean, I've seen a lot of violence in horror movies, and I was still like, oh my God, this is shocking.
Yeah, it was funny, like I said, at that early screening, because we had some people who were really excited for this movie. So like, when it comes up to it and Johnny's about to get somebody, you could hear some guy in there that's like, yeah, yeah, like you could hear people getting excited, and then would go into these like one of these like really long, brutal scenes, and everybody's just like, you could hear a pin drop in that theater, like just absolute silence. Everybody's just like watching the horror, and then afterwards, like a mom and dad get up and leave. You know, it's like, yeah, like this is awesome. And like, I think like those are the things that work best about this movie, but also like, it's not going to be the kind of slasher where you can like jab your friends with your elbow and be like, hey, look at this, you know, like it takes a really long time to get there. And I think the experience of that is good. I think that's the commentary the film's trying to make in its title, In a Violent Nature. That's the commentary the film is trying to make in its presentation, with Johnny trudging through the woods for these really, really long takes. Stuff that was so long they said they had to cut it way back in editing. There's some good jump cuts that make it work, but like, even still, I think people we'll get bored. And I think probably tragically, I think the best parts of In a Violent Nature may be reduced to like clips on YouTube and TikTok that you'll see like in the future. Like, hey, here's this 2-minute sequence from this.
Watch it in 96 parts.
Yeah, because I don't think people will want to come back and like spend the time with it. But I do think what's here is unique and special. And I think Nash has stumbled onto something really cool, even if he did have to shoot it twice. And I like what's happening here overall. Like I came away pleased with this, whereas like some people in my theater were like notably bored, getting phones out, like, oh, it sucks. Like I couldn't believe it. What do these people come to movies for? It's ridiculous.
Heretics. Well, and it's like we had a conversation about this before the show, that and you had pointed out that this is a lot like in the vein of Skinamarink, but also that the director has done something unique and that stands out. And now it's the big question of, well, what do you do next? What do you do with that little burst of success that you've just had?
Right. Like I don't know if this gimmick works twice. I don't know if you can do like the Freddy Krueger stalks somebody through dreams for 90 minutes movie. Maybe you could, like, but I don't know if this formula works again, but the deconstruction of genre works, and I think his place in horror is unique. And like, I think there's somewhere Chris Nash could go next. I just don't know where. But for what's here in A Violent Nature, I think is uniquely special. Though I don't know if I would. I don't know when I'll watch it again. Like, it's one of the, I don't know if I'm going to run out and buy the Blu-ray. Maybe it means a lot to somebody. I'm not sure it meant a lot to me. Any other thoughts or recommendations, Andy?
I think I'm ready.
Andy, would you recommend In a Violent Nature?
I would recommend it to. It's definitely not for everyone. Definitely for those interested in the boldest of cinema, in avant-garde and experimental film, your cinema head, that kind of thing. If you're looking for something different and strange and unique, and that you have a lot of patience for, it's definitely the movie for you. Probably not a recommend for like general audiences or like sit at home with the family or your parents. It is really grisly, the kills, but I think if you're a fan of horror, you should at least give it a try. And if you're a fan of, like I said, avant-garde or experimental cinema, definitely check it out.
Couldn't agree more. I think horror heads are going to eat good with this one. I think Skinamarink fans are going to like this one. I think if you were really into Skinamarink and you don't get why other people weren't into it, you should definitely go see In a Violent Nature. Like, I think there's a certain similarity to them in their pacing and presentation that puts evil on the screen in like a wholly unique way. Unfortunately, a lot of people will find that boring, and I don't. But I don't know, man. It's unique. I'm glad I watched In a Violent Nature in a theater, though. Let me tell you, it will not hit the same on a streamer. It won't be the same when you're hitting play on MGM Plus. You know what I mean? With that, we should move on to our middle segment. Going to be talking about some exciting things that are coming out soon. Excited to get into these. Andy, what do we call this segment?
It's time for the trailer park.